For years, the public was told this never happened, but leaked data tells a very different story. For decades, the sky above the world's most powerful navy looked ordinary, blue, empty, predictable, and yet, hidden behind that calm surface, something else was happening, something recorded, tracked, confirmed, and then quietly set aside. This is not a story about rumors. This is not a story about blurry images or anonymous witnesses. This is the story of official files, acknowledged by the Pentagon, files that were once classified, then briefly revealed, and finally, forgotten. No dramatic press conference. No definitive explanation. Just silence. And silence, when it follows confirmation, can be far more unsettling than denial. The encounters did not happen in distant deserts or remote forests. They occurred in controlled airspace, around advanced warships, observed by trained professionals whose job is to notice threats before they become disasters. What they saw was not supposed to exist. And yet, it kept appearing. At first, everything looked normal. Routine patrols, calm seas, standard flight operations repeating the same patterns they had for years. Nothing unusual, until something broke the rhythm. Not with noise, not with aggression, but with behavior that did not fit. Objects appeared on radar without warning. They moved smoothly, deliberately, with no visible propulsion, no heat signatures, no wings, no exhaust. And when pilots tried to track them, the objects didn't react like aircraft. They didn't accelerate gradually. They didn't turn wide. They didn't behave as if air resistance mattered at all. They simply changed direction. Instantly. As if physics itself had been rewritten, just for them. Here is where the first question emerges. If this was a technical malfunction, why did it happen repeatedly? If it was human technology, why test it against your own navy? And if it was something foreign, why was there no escalation? Because these encounters did not end in confrontation. They ended in confusion. And confusion is dangerous inside systems designed for certainty. The data didn't come from one source. It came from radar, from infrared sensors, from visual confirmation. Different systems, different perspectives. Same conclusion. Something was there, and it behaved in ways no known technology could explain. At times, the objects hovered, perfectly still, against strong winds. At other moments, they dropped from high altitude to sea level in seconds. No sonic boom. No environmental disturbance. No sign that air or water resisted their movement. They crossed boundaries as if boundaries didn't exist. Air, sea, distance. Meaningless. One detail disturbed analysts more than anything else. The objects did not just disappear. They went into the ocean. Straight down. No splash. No debris. No trace. Just a smooth transition from sky to sea. This alone shattered decades of assumptions. Because if something could operate seamlessly in both air and water, it wasn't just advanced. It was operating on principles humans had not mastered. And yet, despite the magnitude of these observations, something strange happened. The reports were not erased. They were archived, stored, categorized, preserved, but never fully explained. Which raises a far more troubling question. Why keep data you cannot explain, but refuse to discuss? Publicly, the language remained calm. Carefully chosen words. Measured tones. No panic. The phenomenon was acknowledged, but stripped of urgency. Unidentified. Unresolved. Under review. Again and again, the same cycle. Acknowledgement without interpretation. Confirmation without conclusion. As if the truth itself had reached a boundary. And stopped. Inside the system, however, tension grew. Because advanced surveillance is designed to reduce uncertainty, not absorb it. Yet here was something that resisted categorization entirely. Every analytical model failed. Every known explanation bent, and then broke. Natural phenomena didn't fit. Foreign technology didn't fit. Experimental platforms didn't fit. The object wasn't fast in the conventional sense. It didn't move through space. It seemed to reposition itself within it. And that created the first true conflict. Not between nations, but between understanding and control. Because to admit that something existed beyond explanation was to admit vulnerability. Not just technological vulnerability, conceptual vulnerability. The realization that there may be limits, not just to knowledge, but to dominance itself. At this point, something changed. Not in the skies, but in the response. Investigations continued, but quietly. Monitoring persisted, but without headlines. Curiosity remained, but behind closed doors. Silence became a strategy. Because when the unknown cannot be neutralized, sometimes the safest option is to contain its impact. Not physically, psychologically. And so the story faded. Public attention shifted. News cycles moved on. The files gathered dust. But the encounters did not stop. They repeated. Same shapes. Same behavior. Same impossible motion. Different days. Different locations. But always the same unsettling conclusion. Whatever this was, it was consistent. Consistency implies intent. And intent implies agency. This is where the mystery deepens. Because if these were random anomalies, patterns wouldn't exist. But patterns did exist. The objects appeared near strategic locations. Around advanced fleets. In regions under constant surveillance. Not everywhere. Specific places. Specific times. Almost as if observation itself was part of the interaction. Even more unsettling was what didn't happen. No aggressive maneuvers. No communication attempts. No displays of force. Just presence. Watching. Moving. Leaving. As if the goal wasn't confrontation, but assessment. And that raises a question few are comfortable asking. What if we weren't the ones doing the observing? At some point, analysts began to realize something else. The silence wasn't accidental. It was structural. Information wasn't lost, it was compartmentalized. Different departments held fragments. Different timelines overlapped, but never aligned. No single narrative emerged. Not because one didn't exist, but because creating one required crossing boundaries that were never designed to be crossed. Here lies the core contradiction. The most advanced detection systems on Earth saw something extraordinary. But the most powerful institutions chose not to pursue explanation publicly. Why? Because explanation creates consequences. And consequences demand decisions. Decisions that could reshape doctrine, belief, and identity itself. Think about what full transparency would imply. Admitting that unknown objects repeatedly entered controlled airspace. And left without consequence. Admitting that physics, as applied in defense planning, was insufficient. Admitting that humanity may not be the most advanced actor in its own environment. Not hostile. Not benevolent. Just superior. Even the possibility was destabilizing. So instead, silence held. Not denial. Not secrecy in the traditional sense. But something more subtle. Deferral. A pause without an endpoint. And here is where the tension peaks. Because the longer silence lasts, the heavier it becomes. Every year without explanation transforms mystery into implication. Every archived report becomes a question waiting to resurface. Every calm statement hides the same unresolved truth. Something happened. Something was confirmed. And something remains unexplained. Before we go further, pause for a moment. If this were merely a mistake, why hasn't it been corrected? If this were a hoax, why was it acknowledged? If this were nothing, why was it never dismissed? And if this were something extraordinary, what would silence protect us from? If you're following this story so far, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because what comes next goes even deeper, into the consequences of silence. And what it may be preparing us for. And now, we move forward. Because the real mystery isn't what was seen in the sky. It's what happened after. What happened next was not dramatic. There were no emergency broadcasts. No sudden policy shifts visible to the public. No announcement that changed daily life overnight. Instead, something far quieter took place. The system adapted. Not to explain the phenomenon, but to live with it. Inside military and intelligence structures, unresolved encounters began to change assumptions. Flight protocols subtly adjusted. Awareness increased in specific regions. Monitoring intensified, even when no anomalies were present. Not because something was expected to attack, but because something might appear. Preparedness replaced certainty. And certainty, once lost, is never easily recovered. Here is where the story moves beyond objects and files. Because the true impact of these encounters was not technological. It was psychological. For the first time in modern history, the most powerful defense systems on Earth encountered something they could not categorize, deter, or fully understand. And instead of confronting it openly, they chose restraint. Silence became a form of control. This decision reshaped priorities. Not in public documents, but in mindset. Because when uncertainty becomes permanent, Strategies evolve, not toward domination, but toward resilience. Over time, the mystery faded from headlines. But it did not disappear from institutional memory. The files remained dormant, waiting, because unresolved data is never discarded. It is preserved until context changes. And context always changes. Here's where the deeper implications begin to surface. What if the silence was not about fear of public reaction? What if it was about avoiding premature conclusions? Because history shows that misinterpretation can be more dangerous than ignorance. Declaring certainty where none exists can force choices that cannot be undone. Consider this. If officials had declared the phenomenon extraterrestrial, what would that have triggered? Political instability, cultural shock, religious reinterpretation, strategic escalation. And if they had declared it foreign technology, conflict might have followed. And if they had declared it nothing, they would have lied. So silence became the only position that preserved flexibility. But silence has a cost. Because unanswered questions do not disappear. They accumulate. They linger beneath awareness. And eventually, they return. Over the years, patterns continue to emerge. Not publicly, but internally. Recurring shapes. Consistent behaviors. Similar locations. The phenomenon did not evolve rapidly. It remained stable. Which suggests something important. Whatever this was, it was not experimental. It did not behave like a prototype. It behaved like a mature system. And mature systems imply long-term presence. Not visitation. Presence. This realization created a quiet shift in worldview. Not officially declared, but subtly felt. Humanity may not be the most advanced intelligence operating within its own environment. Not conquered. Not threatened. But no longer alone at the top. This idea challenges something fundamental. For centuries, progress implied hierarchy. More advanced meant more powerful. More powerful meant more control. But what happens when advancement no longer guarantees dominance? What happens when something exists that simply does not care about your presence? That may be the most unsettling aspect of all. The phenomenon showed no hostility, no curiosity, no communication, just observation and disengagement, as if humanity was not the focus, but merely part of the environment. This reframes the encounters entirely, not as threats, not as visitors, but as indicators. Indicators that reality may be layered, that intelligence may operate on scales we do not perceive, that technology may follow principles we have not yet imagined. And suddenly, the silence makes sense. Because some truths cannot be integrated overnight. They require time, gradual adaptation, psychological preparation. In this context, silence is not avoidance. It is pacing. Now, let's talk about contradiction. Because if the phenomenon was so disruptive, why not increase transparency over time? Why not release more data? Why not guide public understanding slowly? The answer may lie in a difficult truth. Information does not always lead to clarity. Sometimes, it leads to division. And division weakens systems faster than ignorance. There is also another possibility. One that rarely gets discussed. What if further investigation led to answers that created more questions? What if understanding the phenomenon revealed limitations not just in technology, but in perception itself? Because not all realities are compatible with human cognition. Some things, once understood, cannot be unseen. This brings us to the most uncomfortable question of all. What if the reason for silence is not that we know too little, but that we know just enough? Enough to realize that full disclosure would not empower humanity. It would humble it. And humility is destabilizing for systems built on certainty and control. At this stage, the mystery has transformed. It is no longer about UFOs. It is about boundaries. The boundary between knowledge and readiness. Between curiosity and consequence. Between truth and impact. Now ask yourself something honestly. If you were responsible for maintaining global stability, and you encountered something beyond explanation, beyond control, and beyond immediate threat, would you announce it? Or would you wait? This is why the files were not destroyed. And why they were not explained. They were preserved. Because one day, context may change. Technology may advance. Understanding may evolve. And humanity may be ready. Until then, the silence holds. But silence does not mean absence. Even now, reports continue. Observations persist. Patterns remain consistent. The phenomenon did not leave. It simply stopped demanding attention. Which may be the most unsettling possibility of all. That whatever this is, it is patient. Before we end, let me ask you directly. What do you think this represents? Advanced human technology hidden from history? A foreign intelligence probing defenses? A natural phenomenon not yet understood? Or something that challenges our place in the universe itself? Let me know your theory in the comments. Like this video if you believe some truths are hidden for a reason. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue exploring the mysteries others avoid. Because this story does not end here. In the next video, we'll go even deeper. We'll examine why so many UFO encounters seem connected to the ocean. And what that could mean for everything we think we know about our planet. Because if the sky isn't the only place to look, then the real mystery may be much closer than we think.